Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast again. And today I have Debbie Donovan. And Debbie is somebody I met at a medtech conference or medical device marketing conference last August, I think, or well, summer anyway. And the power of networking, and it's really a fun story. I think she was on a panel last year, and I just happened to reach out to her on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, just checking in to say hi." And she's like, "Oh my God!" So, tell our audience what happened next, Debbie.
Well, I've been following you forever. I feel like I think I really started to follow you in earnest back in the early aughts because I was doing cooperative marketing, and we were doing a lot of practice building around different technologies for OBGYNs. And I was
So
very excited about what to do to help practices market themselves. And you were the voice that I kept seeing. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you. That's such a big compliment. It was really fun. I feel like I've known you the moment we met.
well,
Um,
what they call it, periceptal relationship or whatever. It's like I've known you
yeah,
forever, so that's good enough.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's exciting. So I'm glad to have you as a new friend and to get to know you better. And now we were just talking about your Star Wars aficionado. So now, now you are the master.
I don't know. I do my
You know,
best.
it's funny. I was just on vacation. With not nobody should feel sorry for me. We were at our vacation rental in Palm Springs. My daughters are college age now, but one of them wanted to go back there because we haven't been there for a while, and she hasn't been there. And it rained the whole time, and I was so sad. And you know what I did? I actually watched the Star Wars movies. I felt like some escapism.
What order? What order did you watch them in, Stewart? What order?
So I just made it for the first trilogy. So I started with four, five, and six, or one, two,
As
three.
one should. As one
Yeah,
should. There's a big
yeah,
controversy out there as to when you introduce Star Wars to new people, kids, whatever, do you do it in, chronological order, or do you do it in the order in which things were released so that you get the
right,
information with the same ahas that everybody else does, right?
right.
So
That's a good point. I never even thought of that because you're right. Otherwise, it'd be kind of a letdown. Like the big reveal is nothing.
right, right. And so that's actually the really fun thing is so on Disney Plus, when you go to the Star Wars channel, the sub channel, they have it in both order of chronology. So if you're curious about what movie comes before, like Solo comes before episode 2 or whatever, you can see that, or you can watch it in the order in which it was released. And I am a big fan of that. As well as that, I
Wow.
did slog through um, uh, Clone Wars, the animated series, which was a slog. It was really hard to get through. It's just there's a lot of detail in there. It's really helpful because I love all the live action stuff, and a lot of it calls back to that. So now I got to go back and watch some of the other animated stuff. And there's Bad Batch, which is really funny. It's kind of like A Team for in Star Wars land, and there's just an endless place to spend your time when you don't want to do anything else.
You are a fan. I got to give you credit. That's amazing. That's
Well, Andor
exciting.
is coming.
So,
Andor is coming. Woohoo! Best series
yeah.
ever.
So Star Wars memorabilia aside, although I got to tell you actually before we leave that, so Star Wars one was great, and I saw I have the Star Wars 4/1, but I've seen them so long ago. I mean, I've seen the first episode, fourth episode a bunch. The other ones I haven't really seen for a long, long time. I'm not quite as big a fan as you are. So two was really good. The second one in order. The third one I still don't like, the one with the teddy bears. I just don't get it.
Most
Never,
experts
never liked
agree.
it. Never, just still didn't get it.
Most experts agree that episode 5 is really the quintessential great Star Wars episode. That the beginning of episode 6 is great. It's really a continuation on that arc. It's things start to fall apart when they land in Endor, and you can imagine that So remember, Lucas got all of his power because he said he kept his own licensing rights, which was epic at the time. Nobody did that. And so he was thinking in terms of, I'm getting more kids in this than I imagined. So I better make sure that I have kid-friendly toys that the parents want to buy, right? So that's largely one of the reasons. Some experts believe that may be a reason why the Ewoks were on the cuddlier side of things.
Yeah. All right. There we go. So let's move from Ewoks to another sensitive topic. So today we're going to talk about sensitive healthcare topics. And then for people who read our blog and listen to our podcast, we cover this once in a while. And my most recent article or blog post about this was inspired by my wife. And my wife was with a new trainer, and he's like, "So what can I help you with?" And she goes, "Menopause." And when she told me this story, I just laughed, because when I was growing up, that would never, ever have happened. Nobody would just, say the word menopause out loud. And saying like, "Henny, do you mind if I write about that?" She's like, "No, go ahead." So, I'm intrigued by this idea of how do we deal with sensitive healthcare topics. And so, Debbie, tell me, why don't, before, as we get started here, beyond the Star Wars stuff, tell me about your current job and a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive straight into this topic.
Sure. So I am currently the head of commercial for Materna Medical. And what that means is that I have marketing, sales, business development, and reimbursement or market access all under my umbrella of control. So it means that in order for us to make sales, we have to have the best possible messages, which we get from marketing. And the challenge is that Materna makes vaginal dilators, expanding vaginal dilators. And there's a scary
word. I gotta bleep you out somehow. We can't say that word on this. This is a kid show.
Yeah, right. This is not a kid show. There's no Ewoks here.
Yeah.
So we have two expanding vaginal dilators, one that's used at any time in her life, and that can be because of menopause. Typically, women encounter something called vaginal muscle tightness, and there's related painful sex. We've just said two scary words, vaginas and sex, in the same sentence.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear.
Nobody does that. Nobody has that.
Well, I get to talk about that every day, so I'm a little, as they say, acculturated to that. So I have no problem, but it does sort of stop people in the hallway.
Oh, you wouldn't believe it. Being a healthcare marketing agency, we're talking about, erectile dysfunction, hemorrhoids, today vaginas, like it's part of the game.
Ironically, it is easier to talk about men's erectile dysfunction. Do you realize that in 1994 is when Viagra was released to the market? And Bob Dole was the spokesperson? And how many decades are we? How many decades are we now past that? And women do not have sexual health equity. God help us, DEI. So anyway, Materna does have, so the expanding vaginal dilator is used for vaginal muscle tightness and related painful sex. And the technical terms for that are vaginismus and dyspareunia. But we also are founded from that was originally our side project. The original project was expanding vaginal dilator used to expand the vagina during childbirth in the magic hour before she pushes the baby out. So what that means is that it's not a cervical dilator, it's a vaginal dilator. And so we're in clinical study for that and going to finish that clinical workup very soon to submit to the FDA for clearance. So it's a very unique way to approach vaginal muscles. In one case, we're trying to loosen something that's too tight. And in the other case, we're trying to actually prevent an injury to the muscle off the bone, interior, so you can't see it exterior, and that would prevent pelvic organ prolapse in the long haul, which about 50% of women, when they get to 65, are dealing with pelvic organ prolapse, and that is all your organs falling out. So your uterus, your vagina, it like literally tucks down on itself and it starts to fall out. You can see it externally. Your bladder and your rectum can also fall out. Lovely, right? Lovely to be a lady when you're in the third quarter of your life, fourth quarter of your life.
Gee, hold on, don't you think this is fun? Kids, wait till later.
Exactly.
And it's funny because I
have these babies. We want you to have them vaginally, and don't worry, you'll have your vagina falling out at some point in the future. Try having sex with a vagina that's not in her right place. Oh dear, I've said vagina and sex again in the same sentence.
So that's and it's funny because I wasn't even familiar with prolapse until recently, where I have friends of friends and family members and so forth have that. So being, I guess male, it just wasn't on the top of my radar. And it's like, wow, that's really a scary thing. So
menopause, that's the thing, is that menopause, now that Halle Berry has screamed it from the rooftops and Oprah is doing something about it, she's very good at getting on all the sensitive topics, relatively early on. But once Oprah covers it, then it makes it a lot easier to talk about. And so women experience menopause symptoms. Typically, they not only the hot flashes and everything happening on in their body, but it shows up in the bedroom with vaginal muscle tightness. And she can't have sex. And, you'll have all these guys that say, what do you mean? Don't I want it to be tight? Not if it's a shut door, buddy.
Yeah. You have talked about this topic. You have talked about this topic before. So let's talk about, so vaginas and sex are pretty sensitive. We would agree still in this world. And, let's talk about the meta guidelines and Google and Bing, because this is a topic that you're dealing with right now, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. So back in February, just a month ago, Meta came out with some new guidelines about HIPAA related things. For those of us in healthcare, that's about privacy around personal health information, sensitive topics. They had a list, and of the 11 topics, expanding vaginal dilators to treat vaginal muscle tightness and painful sex hit 3 of the 11 categories. So we were essentially excluded from being able to use their retargeting tools, even though they're invisible to us in terms of how they do it. We're not allowed to use them anymore. So it meant that money we were spending in Facebook and Instagram was not converting, and our return on ad spend, or ROAS, was, pathetic. So that was really sad. And we stopped spending on Meta. In Google, we have to be very careful as well about how we talk about things. And Bing actually, interestingly, made us fill out some special forms a few months ago to validate that we are, in fact, a medical device, which we are. The FDA has reviewed our data several times and has cleared us not only for sale, but we did a special study so that we could be over the counter. And that study, well, we'll bookmark that, because that one's another point of frustration for us. So, it's been really tough to do any marketing digitally, which is the way marketing is done these days, using the biggest platforms on the planet, right? And we're a US-based company. We sell just in the US. And to have these censorship policies in place, it just makes it really, really challenging. And we're a small company. We're a startup, right? And that means that our lack of spending in these are not going to, that it's like nothing to these companies. So they don't care. They don't care.
Yeah, it's a challenge too. Sometimes
they don't care that women are suffering, and that's the bummer.
Yeah, for sure. So, we talked a little bit about how it impacts women. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like you mentioned here about, the percentage of women that have this, the other sort of side effects.
Right. So about 17% of women at some point in her life will encounter this vaginal muscle tightness. And it can happen from menopause, as we discussed. It can also happen after childbirth, postpartum, because if she's had a traumatic birth, physically or psychologically or both, Then there's also cancer survivors. And it's not just the bikini cancers. Any cancer treatment, whether it's radiation or chemo or anything, can change the chemistries in your body and increases vaginal dryness and this unconscious vaginal muscle tightening or clenching will happen. Also, sadly, sexual assault survivors are also affected by this, and you can understand why. And there are a potpourri of other conditions. Some women who have sex know that they're going to get a yeast infection, and so they actually don't want to have it. Like there's this whole like, oh, if I have sex, it's going to be painful because of the yeast infection. So there's like that dynamic. And then, of course, there's a few things that are what we call primary vaginismus, and those are people who have anatomical issues that they might be addressing. So not every body forms exactly the way the anatomy textbooks show you. So that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, again, even just talking about the causes of this vaginal muscle tightness can run us very quickly into sensitive topic areas. So you were saying menopause was something that people didn't talk about. Well, don't you remember there was that infamous scene in St. Elmo's Fire where the woman's like whispering, then she whispers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I
it's
remember.
like, why does she keep whispering? So I feel
Yeah,
like
for
even
sure.
these things too. So here's a woman, she has a child, she's dealing with, all the postpartum things, whether it's her first kid, second, third, whatever. And now she's gotten her clearance. Oh, you can go back to having sex. And she's like, what? That
Oh,
childbirth
wow.
experience was really hard for me. And so, oh my God, I can't even imagine doing that. But then you're also in this key moment where your relationship with your partner is so important because you got to be a team when you're trying to be parents. You know this. And
Mhm.
being able to be intimately connected with somebody, that intimacy is important. And so how you define that, redefine that as you go throughout your life, going through all these different phases and stages with all the circumstances, you really, this is how it affects women's lives. And here is where it really kind of bottom lines into the healthcare system. When a woman goes to go and have her pelvic exam, if she is experiencing this unconscious muscle clenching on penetration of a speculum, she is now not able to access standard preventative health care. That's a problem.
Wow.
That's a big
Yeah.
problem. You wonder why some women ignore going to the doctor? A certain percentage of them are ignoring it because that's the issue.
Wow.
So that means she's not getting her cancer screenings. She's not being checked for ovarian cancer and bladder cancer and not so much bladder cancer, but uterine cancer, cervical cancer, STDs if that's an issue, pelvic inflammatory disease, getting an IUD, right? She can't have that. You can't go and have even a colposcopy. So in case you didn't know this, cervical cancer is now really much more detectable. They screen you using a blood test. And if they find that you have an HPV positive, then they keep an eye on you. And colposcopy is the next best thing. Well, those are done in the office. If you can't get a speculum in there for a hysteroscope to do a colposcopy, okay, here we go. Things are not
Yeah.
happening the way they're supposed to.
So
So
that's certainly yeah, it sounds like I mean, there's obviously, and it's even deeper than I expected in terms of the consequences for women. And obviously, we're trying to do a lot better job of women's healthcare than we've done in the past. So, yeah, that's a very educational for me. I'm learning a lot today. So, talk about you've talked about some of the challenges your companies face. What other kinds of things are you dealing with? And I do want to come back to, actually, before you get to that, I want to finish the loop on Facebook. That is really tough because that's in today's world, Facebook, Instagram are a major marketing channel, and to be precluded from that is tough. And there are Facebook reps out there; they're hard to get to, and particularly if you're not spending a lot. And so that can be a battle. So sorry to hear that. And there's other for example, you mentioned HIPAA too. There's some big providers of mental health services that got into trouble over HIPAA and also FDA, and they get precluded from Facebook. That's a problem. It's like that's a huge channel. But I'm curious, what other, challenges have you guys faced? Because it must be exhausting. I mean, it's like you're here trying to help people.
It is. So originally, vaginal dilators were static, and so you got a set of, my CEO calls it the bag of dildos. So it's just these rigid plastic things that you take the first one, you put the first one in, you take it out, you put the next one in. So those were considered wellness products forever. So you just registered with the FDA that you had one, which is what we did with our vaginal dilator. The fact that it was expanding didn't make a difference. But everybody was making all these claims. And so they decided to come after us and they said, hey, you're really a medical device, the expanding component, maybe that's what triggered it. But so we said, okay, well, we'll submit, so then we became a prescribed device. Okay, well, that's okay. Now we're a medical device that's prescribed. That's fine. I've dealt with that before. But before I got to Materna, they had actually done a study with the FDA's blessing to do what's called self-selection. Now, get this. A woman had to read a description of this vaginal muscle tightness, decide on the website that, in fact, she was experiencing this problem. Like she could read the description and understand that that was her. And then she could collaborate or coordinate that with her clinician. And surprisingly, women could figure it out. Okay, we could publish that in the journal, right? It's really not that hard to figure out, but it's hard for women to talk about. Right? Because it's sensitive for her. And so the clinician doesn't see it until they go to try to do that pelvic exam and the woman just goes, "Wah," you know what I mean? So anyway, that was one little hurdle we went through. And in the end, it was great. We got our over-the-counter clearance and we're officially an FDA cleared medical device for over-the-counter sale. That's very unusual. I have never worked on a product like this before in all my career. So we run an e-commerce business on hellomillie.com and we get to sell directly to patients, which is fantastic. I've never felt from a marketer's perspective, right? We do something over here, we see the sales over here, right? You never get that kind of perfect when it's a procedure, right? So this is kind of the really fun part.
Wow, that's it is interesting. Yeah, think about that. Okay, you don't need a prescription, but you need to be FDA cleared. So those two aren't typically the same thing.
And clinicians, they can recommend, which is wonderful because there's so many people getting into menopause game these days and sex therapy, and you don't have to be an MD, a PhD, or whatever. You can go and do any sort of class to become a coach even. And you can do telemedicine appointments and have clients paying you out of pocket. And if you have developed an expertise in this area, you're happily able to recommend our product, which is lovely, right? So we're not hindered by that, but not a lot of people get to do it that way. So it's weird. And so that's been a big hurdle for us to just like, oh, I don't need to write a prescription for this. I just need to recommend it. Okay. Like I recommend vitamins.
And you've worked with on the doctor side for a large part of your career, and it's really hard to get healthcare professionals to focus on anything. They've got a million things to do, and you'd really prefer that was the height of their day every day. Debbie, they walked in like, when can I recommend? And getting the brain space, and we do webinars and books and work with clients, and I can't think of any audience that's harder to influence than a healthcare professional. And
for sure.
And especially something they're not excited about talking about anyway. It's got to be a challenge for sure. So I can see why you're doing the consumer direct side, because on the doctor side, it's going to be tough.
Well, and I would say that based on the work I know you do, you are always telling your customers to come up with unique value propositions in the marketplace.
Right. Yep.
If there was ever a time to have a unique value prop in the marketplace, it's this. The willingness to have this conversation, the willingness to normalize it, the willingness to have women think that they're alone, that nobody else has this problem because nobody talks about it. None of their friends talk about it. Their mothers don't. Nobody talks about this. And so as a result, so that kind of leads into another one, which is our second product, and that's the expanding vaginal dilator that will be used in childbirth. So remember I said that the design of the device is to prevent an injury. It's called a levator anti-muscle avulsion, or tearing off of the bone, so muscle off the bone. So this isn't the external tearing that you would have like an episiotomy and sewing back up after the baby's born. This is the muscle inside. And so remember I mentioned that the consequences of that is all of that stuff falling out, which is your vagina falls out, your bladder falls, your rectum falls, like everything's just falling out inside out, right? It's very strange looking. This is not things you want to see on the internet, but you can find pictures of it. That's another topic people don't talk about. Like women as they age, they don't talk about the fact that they don't really connect the fact that this baby that I pushed out 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago ripped me to shreds externally and internally. And so they don't really connect the dots. And then they end up in a urogyne's office, and the urogyne says, well, we're going to have to go in there and surgically remove things and tack things up and, basically rebuild your lower abdomen so that you can function as a normal person again. My grandmother had it done when she ended up with a hysterectomy when she was in her 80s, which is actually quite rare. Most people have this happen sooner, but we'd be walking around. She lived to be 94, and we'd walk and she'd be like, I got to sit for a minute. And she'd sit down because her uterus was falling out. Her vagina was inverting itself. So she ended up with a hysterectomy, and she did the rectocele and cystocele and got everything put back together again, which was great for her. And it meant that she could live much more comfortably throughout, another 10 years, which was lovely. So I was glad for her. But I do remember the story that my dad was really, really hard to have hard labor with him. And I am absolutely certain that that's where it started.
Wow. So if you had a magic wand, how would you fix this?
Well, so turns out what I would love is for women during childbirth to have access to all the best technology. We know that we're one of the lowest ranking countries in terms of complexities and comorbidities that happen during childbirth. And it's not because we don't spend the most money, it's because there's no innovation. And so if I had my druthers, I would want innovation to be paid for. The problem right now is that labor and delivery is the lowest paid service. So if you think about a hospital, they have cardiac and they've got neurosurgery and orthopedics and all these big ER and all these things make money for hospitals, right? Sadly, OBGYN and labor and delivery in particular is a loss leader. It loses money. And so across the US, not just in rural areas, by the way, but even in urban and suburban areas, labor and delivery service is being closed because the hospitals can't afford to keep it open anymore. And so if I had a magic wand, I would want those things to be fixed. If there's more innovation in birth, then we have the opportunity for improved payments. Like if childbirth was paid for at the same levels at things like cardiovascular and other general surgery and other things that have innovation on a year to 18-month cycle, we wouldn't have this problem, right? But trying to explain that using a device will prevent some other situations from happening. It changes some things it changes some risk factors. That's stuff that's in our clinical study that was published last year. It's another road uphill that we have to push. And it's a challenge, right? We really want birth to be valued in the same way that men's health is valued. Like if you have a prostate problem, a number of treatment options you have, whether it's cancerous or not, is almost unfathomable relative to the treatment options women have. Like, we're still in the dark ages for women's health treatment.
Wow.
So, it's that, and it's also investment. Investors have to be willing to take risks, right? And medical devices take a while because of FDA and because of reimbursement. So you're not going to find a unicorn. We're not the next Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but it changes people's lives. It's like the human part of living, right? So investment is important, and that means that money has to be put into women's health in the same, I would love it to be in the same, equal to what's put in for men's health. If there's a new prostate, anything, men get funded. No problem.
Wow. Yep. So I have a couple questions that we're almost out of time here, but
yeah.
We talked about HCPs, and I'm curious, are OB-GYNs a big part of your efforts? Are you guys going out? Because it would seem like certainly OB-GYNs are on both sides of this, right? Labor and delivery, and they're certainly talking about sex, and they're talking about, so do you have a big HCP effort? Are you guys going more B2C, or is it both?
Well, we do both, right? So in the Millie business, for the expanding vaginal dilator with vibration, that is a direct-to-consumer business, and it's a healthcare professional business. We do both. And the fact that we have an expanding vaginal dilator that is to be used in childbirth means that OBGYNs of the healthcare professionals, they're kind of top of the heap. They're also the front line on the vaginismus side. Like, they're going to see it more. We just did a clinical study, and I think it's more than 40% of the women see more than 2 healthcare professionals when they go to try to deal with this problem. So it's really challenging.
Interesting. And then the other last question is, this is the kind of topic that I'm curious, if how much you're doing with organic social or with influencers, because these are the kinds of things that, certainly lend itself well. Perhaps, I don't know. What has been your experience so far?
Well, I would say there were early days in that, and I've talked to a couple of influencers who are not necessarily menopause. They might be talking about menopause, and they might be talking about weight loss related to menopause or other things. But the sex part, they're worried, like, how do I bring this up to my audience?
Yeah.
I'm talking about like hot flashes and things, and like, I don't know how to talk about this. I'm like, okay, I completely understand what you mean.
I get it. So, last question: any advice for that, or insights you have for people that have to market a sensitive product? Any other things that you think are, like, if I'd only known this when I started this journey, it would have been helpful?
I think the issue is have to have all the channels open. So it's not just paid media. Affiliate marketing is probably the best way to monetize SEO, right? So if you're doing blog exchange with people, or you find somebody who's willing to talk about things, or they are just naturally a group of people that they are a person who has magnetically attracted people to their blog because they are talking about sex and these issues, then you lean in with those folks, and you can do affiliate marketing with them. So it's not exactly influencer marketing. It's a little bit of a step sideways on that, but it's still worthwhile. I mean, and I think we have to have as many channels available as possible. Meet her where she is. If she finds out about us, we want her to get on our newsletter. If she is, we want her to tell her friends, give her something to talk about with her friends. Maybe she becomes the catalyst. It gets to have this conversation. We see this a lot in very conservative religious communities. The vaginismus can actually fire up because until the day you're married, you're supposed to not think about sex. And then all of a sudden you're married and now you're supposed to think about sex. And it's a little more challenging, more complicated for women than that. You can't just turn it on and off that easily, right? You've been taught to be one way your whole life and conditioned, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to not be. Ooh. But you never
Yeah.
know. Things bubble up from other places, and I think again the menopause conversation happening right now is so helpful. Oh my God, so helpful. And cancer is not whispered anymore, and there's a lot of childbirth influencers now out there. So I think that pregnancy and childbirth is probably going to be a little easier for us because that's an easier topic to get. It's not so sensitive, right? Because everybody wants people to have babies these days. So not the hardest thing in the world. But yeah, so yeah, I think that's where we're at.
Cool. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today. It was fun and um, it's, what's the right word here? There's some puns, I guess, but it was a stimulating conversation. I mean, it was just really something that I think, but I've always noticed the puns always happen when we're talking about hemorrhoids or these kinds of things. But so I've enjoyed it. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And we'll see you at the next one.